Hello, Patriots. I'm Lee Watts, and this is Patriot Point, your source for news and information from a conservative, Christian, and common sense point of view. Well, we see the American economy right now is crashing and crashing hard. Ironically, this is after we just came off of 3 or 4 years of the economy doing the best it had done in nearly a century. Prices were low. People had money in their pockets. Everybody was out working. And yet in just 2 or 3 years of a socialist administration pushing socialist policies, we've seen that people can't find baby formula. Lumber prices have quadrupled. Gas prices are about to reach an all-time record high ever. And there's labor shortages everywhere. Why is this? Because of socialist policies. If you were to go to the main universities nowadays, they're pushing socialism as the way to go. It's what's being pushed in the main entertainment programs. And so what we're going to do is something unique here on the program for the next few weeks. I'm going to be doing a short series on an in-depth look into socialism. If you have a young person who's being told this is the way to go, if you even know an adult who's being told this, I highly encourage you, share this video and this series of videos with them. So join me now as we do an in-depth look into what is socialism. First of all, if you were to talk to an average liberal today, they would have a little chart for you that looks something like this. And they would show that conservative ideas, such as maybe libertarianism, capitalism, would be on the right, and communism would be on the left. Now, notice what they would put on the far right would be fascism. Fascism, that's the program that the Nazis followed. So Nazism, fascism, they would say that's where capitalism leads, but on the left is where you would have socialism and the far left communism. This is what would commonly be taught, and this is incorrect. It is not that way at all. You will notice it is not capitalism that leads to fascism, which is, again, that's what the Nazis were. It is liberalism that leads to fascism. For an example of this, I want to give you a great quote from former President Ronald Reagan.
Because how do we call a liberal? You know, someone very profoundly once said many years ago that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism. And what is fascism? Fascism is private ownership, private enterprise, but total government control and regulation. Well, isn't this the liberal philosophy? The conservative, so-called, is the one that says less government, get off my back, get out of my pocket, and let me have more control of my own destiny.
So notice what President Reagan had said. He said, fascism, what is fascism? It is total government control and regulation. Well, that's where socialism is, where you get the government is regulating more and more. Communism, they regulate everything. Fascism, total government control. And we are seeing how the government is just telling businesses more and more, these liberals in government saying, we're going to take over and socialize what you are doing. Total government control is fascism. For an example of this, notice what happened recently in the United States Congress.
Guarantee to the American people, because of the inaction of the United States Congress, ever increasing prices unless the demand comes down, and the $5 will look like a very low price in the years to come if we are prohibited from finding new reserves, new opportunities to increase supplies.
And guess what this liberal would be all about? This liberal will be all about socializing, would be about basically taking over and the government running all of your companies.
And what is fascism? Fascism is private ownership, private enterprise, but total government control and regulation. Well, isn't this the liberal philosophy?
There you have Congresswoman Maxine Waters saying, listen, we're going to take over your businesses, socialize, total government control. Liberalism, socialism, communism, fascism, It's all the same thing. Bunch of eggheads out there want to define it as something else, but the actual end result is the government will tell you everything that you are going to do with your business, and the end result is always the exact same thing. Now, let's talk right now. We got the Democratic Party. They're pushing this idea of a democratic socialist. So you can be a Democrat or you can be a democratic socialist. I'm here to tell you these are the exact same thing. The Democratic Party today is not the Democratic Party of your grandfather. It is the Socialist Party of America. For an example of how this is completely true, I will now show you another video clip of someone who was, at the time, the leader of the entire Democratic Party in America, and they cannot tell you the difference between a Democrat and a socialist.
The difference between us and the Republicans is that we really are a Big Tent party.
Well, what is the difference between a Democrat and a socialist? I used to think there was a big difference. What do you think it is?
The difference between
a Democrat like Hillary Clinton and a socialist like Bernie Sanders.
What's the difference between being a Democrat and being a Republican?
Well, what's the big difference between a Democrat and a socialist? You're the chairman of the Democratic Party. Tell me the difference between you and a socialist.
The relevant debate that we'll be having over the course of this campaign is what's the difference between a Democrat and a Republican?
So you have Ms. Wasserman, who is the head of the Democratic Party of the United States. And she's like, there's no difference between a Democrat and a socialist. They kept asking her, I think 3 times. She can't mention a difference. And of course, you've got the person on the Democratic side pushing this idea is Bernie Sanders. Let's notice what Bernie says.
Democratic socialism means that we must create an economy that works for all, not just the very wealthy. Public education must today allow every person in this country the right to go to a public college or university tuition free. Democratic socialism means that our government does everything it can to create a full employment economy, that we must raise the minimum wage to a living wage. We need to develop a political movement which once again is prepared to take on and defeat a ruling class whose greed is destroying our nation.
Now, we can't be having all of these liberals, socialists, talking about the great wonders of socialism in their little dream world without a little counterpunch. So now I want to give you another video from President Reagan talking about the dangers of socialism.
You cannot strengthen the weak by weakening the strong. You cannot... You cannot help the wage earner by pulling down the wage payer. You cannot help the poor by destroying the rich. You cannot help men permanently by doing for them what they could and should do for themselves.
Now let's talk about how socialism always leads to communism and fascism, which is Nazism, are the exact same thing. First of all, notice this quote from Adolf Hitler in 1938. He said, "Society's need come before the individual's needs." Now that is very anti-American. However, we are seeing this is the exact same idea being pushed by the left right now. Notice this quote from Hillary Clinton back in 2008. She said, "We must stop thinking of the individual and start thinking about what is best for society." Wait a second. Doesn't that sound like the exact sentiment that Adolf Hitler was pushing? This liberalism and Nazism seems like that's very much the same idea. They simply rebrand it with a new title to make it more palatable. The left is doing this all the time, relabeling things. Notice what else Adolf Hitler said. He said, "We are socialists." Now you might think, hey, wait a second here, Mr. Watts. I thought he was a Nazi. I thought he was a fascist. Well, stay with me and we're going to explain the difference and how there actually is no difference. Notice what he says. We are socialist. We are enemies of today's capitalistic economic system. So notice, what is the exact enemy of capitalism? It is socialism. It says we are socialist. We are enemies of today's capitalist economic system with unfair salaries. We are determined to destroy this system under all conditions. Well, doesn't that just sound like what we are hearing from the left nowadays? Unfair salaries. Well, you know what? If I'm a doctor and I've worked for all kinds of years in my field and I've gone to school and got all this education, you know what? You should have a much greater salary than somebody who dropped out of high school and is flipping burgers for a living. A capitalist or conservative position says equal opportunity. The liberal, fascist, socialist opportunity says equal outcome. And there is a major difference between the two. Now notice we have Adolf Hitler here, the leader of the Nazi Party, a group of fascists, and he's saying in the quote that he's a socialist. Now why would he do that? Here's the reason why. It's because the word Nazi actually means you're a socialist. The word Nazi was an abbreviation of the first two syllables of the political party of Adolf Hitler. His political party was the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Now they took the first syllable from the first word, na, from nationalist. And then the first syllable of the second word is socialist, or the way a German-speaking person would pronounce that would be Sozialist. So you have na-zi. Nazis are socialist. So everybody who is talking right now saying, hey, the far-right capitalists, they're Nazis. No, quite the opposite. The liberals, the socialists, are quite literally Nazis. You get anybody out there who's pushing socialist or says they're a socialist, they are quite literally a Nazi. And that's the same thing that we've been seeing that the left is pushing. Things from Bernie Sanders and others talking about these unfair salaries, destroy this system. There's no difference between National Socialism and Democratic Socialism. It's all the same thing, which is Nazism. Now let's talk about communism. Some people say, well, there's socialism, there's fascism, but then there's communism, as if these are different things. We have already seen where socialism and Nazism are the exact same thing, and now we're going to look at how communism is also just a relabeling of the same thing. Remember the great communist empire, the USSR. Remember what it stood for? United Soviet Socialist Republic. You're like, wait a second, I thought they were communist. Yes, do you realize that communists are socialist? Nazis are socialist. So this idea of the democratic socialist, democratic liberalism, communism, Nazism, they are all the exact same thing. Notice this quote from Anita Khrushchev, who was the leader of the communist USSR. Notice what he said. He said, your children's children will live under communism. You Americans are so gullible. You won't accept communism outright, but we will keep feeding you small doses of socialism until you finally wake up and find you already have communism. Hey everybody, wake up. That is exactly what is happening today. This always leads to total government control. Democrat, liberal, Fascist, socialist, communist, Nazi, it's all the same thing. Now notice how Khrushchev here is having the raised fist. This is the symbol of these militant radical leftists. You'll see that's the same thing that Bernie Sanders and his followers do at all of their rallies. You have Hugo Chavez, the great communist leader down there in South America, same thing. Fidel Castro in Cuba, the great tyrant communist, same thing. Elizabeth Warren from the left here in America, or Barack Obama. It is over and over and over again. These people are out and outright communist Nazis, and they've just relabeled it as democratic socialism, and we're waking up, and we've got to push back against this. Notice this picture of Vladimir Lenin, the great communist takeover over there in Russia, holding the fist up. Notice this quote from Vladimir Lenin. He said, "Give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed I have sown will never be uprooted." What is the great communist leader over there in Russia? What did he say? Hey, give me 4 years. Give me the kids in college, and I tell them that socialism is what you need to be. They will wind up taking over the government, and I will have a socialist government. That's exactly what has happened. Here you see this is the University of North Carolina during the United States national anthem. What do we see? The raised communist Nazi fist of socialism. Here you have the University of Virginia in 2017. What do we see? A socialist protest, always with a raised fist, and it usually turns out to be quite violent as well. So we're going to stop there for this week. We have just scratched the tip of the iceberg. Each and every week, we're going to go more in depth into this, and it's going to get more and more eye-opening, maybe a little scary. I'm saying for us to sit back and do nothing, it's going to cost us everything. We are on the precipice of a great famine in the United States because of the socialist policies. We are on the precipice of people not being able to use their cars because of socialist policies. America needs patriots now more than ever to be pushing against these socialist, leftist, fascist, liberal, democratic ideas on every single front. Well, this is the first part of our look into socialism. I hope you'll tune in each and every week. So until next week, I'm Lee Watts for Patriot Point, reminding you that liberty is not a spectator sport.